My dad and sister were hosting Grandma's 82nd birthday when my husband leaned in and whispered, "Get your bag, we are leaving. Act like nothing is wrong." I thought he was being dramatic until he locked the car doors and said, "Something is very, very wrong." 15 minutes later, I called the police. My name is Audrey, and at 34 years old, I work as a forensic auditor finding hidden money and fraud for a living. But nothing could have prepared me for the crime scene I walked into last Saturday. Before I tell you how a birthday cake turned into a felony investigation, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever sensed something was rotten in your own family. The afternoon started perfectly at my grandmother's sprawling lake house in Lake Geneva. The lawn was manicured to perfection. A string quartet was playing Mozart in the gazebo. My father Thomas was playing the role of the devoted son, holding Grandma Beatrice's hand for every photo opportunity. My sister Brittany, the golden child, was busy showing off her new diamond tennis bracelet to anyone who would listen. To them, I was just Audrey, the cold number cruncher who never learned how to smile for the cameras. But my husband Liam saw what I missed. Liam is a landscape architect. He notices details. He notices when a shadow is out of place. We were standing by the refreshments table when I saw his body go rigid. He was not looking at the guests. He was staring across the lawn at the French doors leading to the study. My brother-in-law Dante was there. Dante is a real estate agent with a smile that never quite reaches his eyes. He was standing over Grandma's special herbal tea set, the one she drinks from every afternoon for her blood pressure. Liam gripped my arm hard enough to bruise. "Do not look over there, Audrey," he hissed under his breath. "Keep smiling. Put your drink down. We are walking to the car right now." I tried to pull away. I asked him what was wrong because Grandma was about to cut the cake. He did not answer. He just steered me firmly through the crowd of guests, using his body to shield mine. I caught my father's eye across the lawn. He frowned at me and started walking toward us, his face darkening with anger. Liam moved faster. We practically ran the last 20 feet to the gravel driveway. As soon as we were inside our SUV, Liam hit the electronic lock button. The click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet interior. I looked at him, and his face was pale. My hands were shaking as I asked him why we were running away from my own family on such an important day. He started the engine, revving it louder than necessary, and looked me dead in the eye. "Dante just poured a packet of white powder into your grandma's tea, Audrey. And he did it while your father was standing guard at the door." "That is impossible," I screamed, grabbing the door handle with both hands. It was locked tight. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Liam, turn this car around right now. If Dante poisoned her, we need to call an ambulance, not run away like cowards." I stared at him, waiting for him to admit he was mistaken. But Liam did not turn around. He merged onto the highway, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and anger that chilled me to the bone. "We cannot go back, Audrey," he said quietly. "Because it is not just Dante. It is everyone." "What do you mean, everyone?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Liam took a deep breath, keeping his eyes on the road. "You know those two men in suits your father said were old college friends, the ones waiting in the upstairs study?" I nodded, remembering the two older men who had barely made eye contact with anyone. One of them is Judge Hamilton, my father's golf partner. The other is a notary public who lost his license 3 years ago for fraud. I recognized him from a news report I saw last year. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My father told me they were just friends stopping by for a drink. "They are not there for cake," Audrey. Liam continued, his voice steady but grim. "They are waiting for that tea to kick in. Once your grandmother is unconscious or disoriented, they are going to guide her hand to sign a new will. Or worse, they will just take her thumbprint while she is out cold." I felt bile rise in my throat. My father. My own father, who taught me how to ride a bike and paid for my college tuition. The man who sat at the head of the table every Thanksgiving. Liam was suggesting he was a monster capable of assaulting his own mother. "No," I whispered, shaking my head violently. "Dad has a gambling problem, sure, and Brittany is spoiled. But they would not drug an 82-year-old woman. That is assault. That is criminal." Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He handed it to me without looking away from the traffic. Look at the last photo I took. Zoom in on the document sticking out of the judge's briefcase near the window. I took the phone with trembling fingers. The screen showed a grainy but clear image of a legal document. The heading was bold and unmistakable. Last Will and Testament of Beatrice C. Miller. My breath hitched. The document was dated for today. They planned this perfectly, Liam said. The loud music to cover any noise, the guests as an alibi to show she was happy and surrounded by family. And you and I were just props. We were there to make it look legitimate, so no one would suspect foul play later. Tears finally spilled down my cheeks, hot and angry. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. But mostly I realized we had no time to lose. I looked at Liam and wiped my face. "Give me your phone," I said. "I am calling the police." "Hang on," Liam shouted as he slammed his foot onto the gas pedal. Gravel sprayed against the undercarriage of our SUV, sounding like 1,000 tiny bullets. We fishtailed onto the main exit road, leaving a cloud of dust between us and the estate, but it was not enough coverage. In the side mirror, I saw the menacing black grille of Dante's Range Rover tearing across the lawn. He was cutting us off. He was not just trying to scare us, he was trying to stop us from leaving with the evidence. My fingers fumbled over the keypad, but I managed to hit the call button. The line rang once, twice, and then connected. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the terror gripping my chest. I need police immediately to 1200 Lakeview Drive. My grandmother is being poisoned by her family and held against her will. I repeated the address, screaming to be heard over the roar of the engines. "Ma'am, slow down. Who is poisoning her? Did you witness an assault?" I looked back. Dante was right on our bumper now, close enough that I could see the rage contorting his face. Yes, I witnessed it. My brother-in-law put an unknown substance in her tea, and there is a corrupt judge inside the house waiting to force her signature. This is a life or death situation. Suddenly, the whole car shuddered violently. Metal screeched against metal, sending a vibration straight up my spine. He hit us. I screamed into the phone, clutching the dashboard to keep from hitting my head. He just rammed our car. "Ma'am, are you in a vehicle?" The dispatcher's voice finally rose in urgency. "I am in a silver Lexus SUV heading south on Route 50. We are being pursued by a black Range Rover. He is trying to run us off the road." Liam fought the steering wheel, correcting our path before we spun into the ditch. "I am not letting him win, Audrey," he growled, his eyes locked on the road ahead. He swerved hard to the left, crossing the double yellow line to overtake a slow-moving truck, putting a barrier between us and Dante. The dispatcher came back on the line. "Officers have been dispatched to the residence, and a patrol unit is 2 minutes away from your location. Do not stop your vehicle until you see the lights." I looked behind us one last time. Dante was stuck behind the truck, slamming his hands on his steering wheel in frustration. We were safe for the moment, but my hands were still shaking uncontrollably. I knew that by making this call I had just declared war on the people who shared my blood. But as I thought of Grandma Beatrice helpless in that chair, I knew I would do it again. The real nightmare was only just beginning. The wail of sirens cut through the humid afternoon air as 2 patrol cars swung into the driveway of the estate. Liam followed close behind them, his hands tight on the wheel. My stomach twisted into knots as we pulled up to the front steps. The string quartet had stopped playing. The guests were huddled in small groups, whispering and pointing as the officers stepped out of their vehicles with hands resting on their holsters. I took a deep breath and opened my car door. I knew that once I stepped onto that gravel, there was no turning back. I was accusing my own father of a felony. My father Thomas walked down the stone steps to meet us. He did not look angry. He did not look guilty. He looked perfectly calm and deeply concerned. He smoothed the front of his linen suit and extended a hand to the lead officer. "Officers, is everything all right?" My daughter called me in a panic, but she sounded very confused. I stepped forward, my voice shaking with rage. "Stop pretending, Dad. We saw Dante drug Grandma's tea. We know Judge Hamilton is inside with a fake will. I want this house searched right now." The officer looked between me and my father. He signaled for his partner to follow me. "Ma'am, lead the way." We ran up the grand staircase. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I expected to burst into the study and find the judge hovering over my unconscious grandmother. I expected to see the ink drying on the stolen documents. I threw open the double oak doors and pointed to the corner where she always sat. "There she is. Check her vitals." Grandma Beatrice was slumped in her favorite velvet wingback chair. Her head was lolling to the side and her mouth was slightly open. She looked like she was in a coma, not a nap. "Beatrice, Grandma. Wake up." I rushed to her side, grabbing her cold hand. She let out a low snore but did not stir. The officer shined a flashlight into her eyes. "She is unresponsive," he said, reaching for his radio. "I need paramedics to this location, possible overdose." "Check the tea," I shouted, turning to the side table. "That is where the poison is." Liam pointed to the silver tray. But my blood ran cold. The delicate porcelain cup with the hand-painted roses was there, but it was empty. It was not just empty. It was sparkling clean. Someone had washed it and placed it back on the saucer. There was no residue, no white powder, no evidence. And the Judge Liam asked, looking around frantically, "Where are the men in suits?" The room was empty. The French doors leading to the back balcony were unlatched, blowing slightly in the breeze. They had slipped out the back the moment they saw the police lights. My father stepped into the doorway behind us. His face was a mask of sorrow. "Officer, I think my daughter is having one of her episodes again. My mother always takes a nap at this time. And as for judges or notaries, there is no one here but family." The officer looked at the clean teacup, then at my sleeping grandmother, and finally at me. His expression shifted from urgency to skepticism. "Ma'am, is there anyone else who can corroborate your story about the drugs?" I looked at Liam, but I knew without saying a word. We had walked right into a trap. "Officer, please. You have to understand," my father said, wiping a tear from his cheek. He pulled a folded paper from his inside jacket pocket. "My daughter Audrey has been struggling for years." He lowered his voice but made sure I could hear every word. "She has a history of paranoia. Ever since her mother passed, she sees conspiracies everywhere. We have tried to get her help, but she refuses medication." He handed the paper to the officer. It was a letterhead from a psychiatric clinic I had never visited in my life. The officer scanned the document and his posture changed. He relaxed his hand away from his holster and looked at me not as a witness, but as a problem. "That is a lie," I screamed, stepping forward. "I have never been to a psychiatrist. That document is forged. Check the signature, check the dates. My father is manipulating you, just like he manipulates everyone else." Liam pulled me back gently, whispering in my ear to stay calm, but it was too late. The damage was done. My outburst only confirmed the narrative my father was spinning. I looked at Brittany, expecting her to defend me, expecting her to tell the truth for once in her life. Brittany sighed and shook her head, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Oh, Audrey," she said with a voice so sweet it made my teeth ache. "We all love you. We just want you to get better. Nobody is poisoning Grandma. You are just jealous because she told us this morning she is leaving the lake house to me. But I told Dad I would share it with you. You do not have to make up these crazy stories to get attention." She walked over and tried to hug me, but I recoiled as if she were a snake. Jealous, I laughed, but it sounded hysterical even to my own ears. "I do not want this house. I want Grandma to be safe from you vultures. You are stealing her life, not just her property." Brittany looked at the officers with wide, sad eyes. "See what I mean?" she whispered. "She gets like this when she is off her meds. It is heartbreaking, really. We tried to keep it private, but today was just too much for her." The lead officer closed his notebook with a snap. He handed the fake medical record back to my father. "Mr. Miller, I am sorry for the disturbance. We see this a lot with family disputes." He turned to me, his face hard and unyielding. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you to leave the premises immediately. You are trespassing and causing a scene. If you do not leave voluntarily, we will have to escort you out in cuffs." "But officer," I pleaded, pointing at the empty teacup. "They destroyed the evidence. You have to believe me." "It is a civil matter now," the officer said, cutting me off. "If you have proof of a crime, bring it to the station. Otherwise, go home and let your family celebrate in peace." My father put his arm around Brittany's shoulder, the picture of a grieving family unit. They watched us with triumphant smirks masked as concern. I realized then that they had prepared for this moment for months. They had not just planned to steal the estate. They had planned to destroy my credibility so completely that no one would ever believe me. "Come on, Audrey," Liam said, his voice low and dangerous. "We are leaving. But this is not over." The officer took a step closer, his hand resting heavily on his belt. The threat hung in the humid air between us. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. You are disturbing the peace on private property. If you do not get in your vehicle and leave right now, I will have no choice but to place you under arrest for disorderly conduct." I looked around desperately. The guests were staring. The string quartet had stopped playing. I was being treated like a criminal at my own grandmother's birthday party, while the real criminals stood on the porch pretending to be victims. I opened my mouth to argue, to beg him to just check the trash for the poison packet, but Liam stepped in front of me. He placed both hands on my shoulders, his grip firm and grounding. "Audrey, stop. Look at me." He turned my face away from the police and the house. "Do not give them the satisfaction. If you get arrested today, you cannot help Grandma tomorrow. That is exactly what they want. They want you discredited and locked up." I trembled with rage, but I knew he was right. I looked past Liam's shoulder one last time. My father was shaking his head, looking at the ground, with a performance of deep, paternal disappointment. Brittany was dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, but it was Dante who caught my eye. He was standing just behind the lead officer in the shadow of the doorway where the police could not see him. When he saw me looking, he did not look away. He slowly raised his hand and gave me a small, mocking wave. Then he smiled. It was a cold, predatory smirk that sent ice through my veins. It was a smile that said, "I won, and you cannot prove a thing." He mouthed 2 words to me. "Too late." The arrogance of it made my vision blur. He knew he had gotten away with it. He knew the system was protecting him because he wore a nice suit and knew how to lie. "Come on, Audrey." Liam's voice was gentle, but commanded obedience. "Let's go." He guided me back to our SUV, shielding me from the stares of the wealthy guests who were whispering behind their champagne flutes. I felt a physical pain in my chest as I climbed into the passenger seat, leaving Grandma Beatrice behind in that house of vipers. I felt like I was abandoning a child in a lion's den. Liam started the engine and we rolled slowly down the gravel driveway. The police cruisers followed us until we reached the main road, ensuring we were truly gone. I watched the iron gates of the estate close in the rearview mirror, shutting us out. I felt small. I felt powerless. The silence in the car was heavy and suffocating. I buried my face in my hands, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. "We failed her, Liam. We failed her." Liam reached over and took my hand. His palm was warm and steady against my shaking skin. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me it would be okay. Instead, his voice was low and fierce, filled with a cold resolve I had never heard before. "We lost this round, Audrey," he said, staring straight ahead at the asphalt. "But this is not over. They made one mistake." I looked up at him, wiping my eyes. "What mistake?" Liam tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "They let us leave, and now we are going to burn their whole kingdom to the ground." The sun had barely risen when the nightmare knocked on my front door. I had not slept a wink. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a cold cup of coffee, while Liam was on the phone with his brother who worked in security. We were trying to formulate a plan. We were trying to figure out how to get back into that house without getting arrested, but my father had been busy while we were pacing the floor. The knock was sharp and authoritative. It was not a friendly neighbor stopping by. I exchanged a look with Liam and walked to the door, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. I opened it to find 2 deputies standing on my porch. They were not the same officers from the birthday party. These men were taller, sterner, and held a thick manila envelope. "Audrey Miller," one of them asked, checking a clipboard. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. "You are being served." He thrust the envelope into my hands. This is a temporary restraining order granted by Judge Hamilton this morning. You are hereby prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Beatrice Miller, Thomas Miller, or Brittany Miller. I stared at the paperwork, the letters swimming before my tired eyes. A restraining order. My knees buckled, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. On what grounds? I whispered. I am trying to protect her. The officer looked at me without an ounce of sympathy. The petition cites elder abuse, specifically inflicting severe emotional distress and harassment of a vulnerable adult. It states that your behavior yesterday caused Mrs. Miller significant anxiety and exacerbated her heart condition. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. They were using my outburst against me. My attempt to save her was now the legal justification to keep me away. If you violate this order, you will be arrested immediately and held without bail. The officer continued. Do you understand? I could not answer. I could only think of Grandma Beatrice alone in that big house with people who wanted her dead. If I could not go near her, who would make sure she was eating? Who would check her tea? Liam stepped up behind me and took the envelope from my trembling hands. We understand, officer, he said, his voice cold and controlled. Is that all? The deputies nodded and turned to leave. As they walked back to their cruiser, I slid down the wall to the floor, burying my face in my knees. I screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure frustration. They won Liam, I sobbed. They built a wall around her. I cannot save her if I cannot even get near the driveway. Liam sat down beside me and pulled me into his arms. He did not say it was going to be okay. He knew as well as I did that the clock was ticking and we had just been locked out of the game. I thought the restraining order was rock bottom, but I was wrong. The digital assassination began exactly at noon. I was trying to eat a piece of toast when my phone started buzzing violently against the granite counter. It was not a call. It was a relentless stream of notifications. Ping after ping after ping. Liam picked it up, and his jaw tightened. Do not look at this, Audrey, he said, trying to turn the screen over. But I snatched it from his hand. It was an Instagram notification. Brittany was live. I clicked the link, and there she was. My sister sat in her sunroom, bathed in perfect natural light, wearing a modest white sweater that made her look innocent and vulnerable. She had clearly rehearsed this. Tears were streaming down her face, but her mascara remained flawlessly intact. Hey guys, she whispered into the camera, wiping her eyes with a delicate tissue. I know I usually post fashion hauls or lifestyle content, but today I need to share something personal. My heart is breaking. I watched in horror as the viewer count climbed to 3,000. Brittany took a shuddering breath. Yesterday was supposed to be a celebration of my grandmother's life, but my sister Audrey turned it into a nightmare. She showed up demanding that Grandma sign over the lake house to her immediately. When Grandma refused, Audrey caused a scene that terrified everyone. She even accused our dad of poisoning the tea just to create chaos. I threw my phone onto the couch. She is lying, I screamed at the empty room. She is twisting everything. But the comments section was already moving too fast to read. Prayers for you, Brittany. Your sister sounds toxic. Money really brings out the worst in people. The court of public opinion was in session, and I had already been found guilty without a trial. Then came the text messages. Relatives who had not spoken to me in years were suddenly experts on my character. My Aunt Sarah sent a paragraph calling me a disgrace to the family name. Cousin Mike told me to never show my face at Christmas again. Even my college roommate sent a text asking if I needed the number for a therapist. They all bought Brittany's performance hook, line, and sinker because she was the one with the microphone. I walked to the window to get some air and saw Mrs. Higgins from across the street checking her mailbox. We usually wave to each other. But today she looked up, saw me standing there, and immediately looked down. She grabbed her mail and hurried back inside, slamming her door shut. The gossip had already traveled from the internet to my front lawn. I felt a suffocating weight press down on my chest. They had not just stolen my grandmother. They were systematically dismantling my reputation, my relationships, and my life. And the terrifying part was how easy it was for them to do it. Liam walked over and closed the blinds, plunging the room into shadow. "Let them talk," he said. "It will only make the truth hurt more when we expose them." But looking at my phone lighting up with fresh hatred, I wondered if there would be anything left of us to save by then. The phone rang again just as I was forcing myself to drink a glass of water. I flinched, expecting another hate message from a distant cousin or a neighbor telling me I was ungrateful. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. It was Mr. Henderson, my managing director. He never called on weekends unless the building was on fire or a major client had been indicted. I wiped my clammy hands on my jeans and answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello, Mr. Henderson." There was no warm greeting, no small talk about the weather. "Audrey, I'm going to get straight to the point. We received a formal complaint this morning regarding your professional conduct." I frowned. "A complaint? From which client?" I just closed the Anderson file and they were thrilled with my work. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "It is not from a client. The board received a detailed report alleging that you have been using firm resources to investigate personal family matters and that you are currently mentally unstable." The room spun. My father. It had to be him. He had worked in banking for 40 years. He knew exactly which buzzwords would trigger an immediate compliance review. He knew that an accusation of mental instability combined with misuse of data was a death sentence for a forensic auditor. "Sir, that is completely false," I stammered. "I can prove that I have never used company software for personal use. This is a retaliatory attack from my family because I uncovered elder abuse." "I am afraid it is out of my hands, Audrey," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Given the severity of the allegations and the potential liability to the firm, we have no choice. You are being placed on unpaid administrative leave effective immediately. Your access to the company's servers has already been revoked. Do not log in. Do not contact any clients. We will reach out once the internal investigation is concluded." The line went dead before I could argue. Unpaid leave. I stared at the phone, feeling the blood drain from my face. My salary was the only thing keeping us afloat. Liam's landscaping business was seasonal, and we had just put all our savings into the down payment for our house. Without my paycheck, we could not pay the mortgage, let alone hire a lawyer to fight for Grandma. Liam walked in from the garage holding a toolbox. He saw my face and dropped the box on the floor. "What happened?" I looked at him and my voice broke. "Dad got to my boss. I am suspended, Liam. No pay, no access. They cut us off." I sank onto the floor, feeling the walls closing in. My father was not just protecting himself. He was systematically destroying my ability to fight back. He knew that without money I was powerless. He was starving us out just like a medieval siege. And looking at the unpaid bills on the counter, I was terrified that it was working. Liam did not come home until after midnight. When he walked through the door, he smelled like rain and cheap gas station coffee. He tossed his keys on the counter and looked at me with hollow eyes. "I found her," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "She is not at the lake house anymore. Thomas moved her 2 hours ago under the cover of darkness. They took her to a place called the Serenity." The name sounded peaceful, like a spa or a meditation retreat. But as Liam pulled up the website on his tablet, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The homepage featured smiling seniors playing chess and walking through rose gardens. It promised world-class care and luxury accommodations. But Liam shook his head and swiped to the satellite view on Google Maps. "Do not let the marketing fool you, Audrey. I drove out there. It is not a retirement home. It is a fortress." He pointed to the perimeter of the facility. "See those hedges? Behind them is a 10-foot steel fence topped with motion sensors. The front gate has armed security. Every door inside requires a biometric scan to open. It is a prison designed for the ultra-wealthy to stash their inconvenient relatives. They market it as security for dementia patients, but it is really isolation for people with large estates. It is where you put someone when you want them to disappear legally." I zoomed in on the image. It looked like a gilded cage. "Is she okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did you see her?" Liam shook his head. I tried to get past the front desk. I told them I was her grandson, delivering her medication. The receptionist looked me up in the system, and her face went blank. She said Beatrice Miller is on a restricted visitation list authorized by her power of attorney, Thomas Miller. No visitors, no packages, and no outside communication. My heart stopped. What about her phone, I asked. Grandma never goes anywhere without her iPhone. She plays Wordle every morning and FaceTimes me every night. Liam slammed his fist lightly on the table. That is the worst part. The receptionist let it slip that all personal communication devices were confiscated upon check-in. They claim it is to prevent agitation and confusion, but we know the truth. They took her phone so she cannot call for help. They have cut her off completely. She is trapped in a luxury suite with no way to tell the world that she is being held against her will. She is sitting in a room with silk sheets and gourmet food, but she is a prisoner. And the worst part is, she probably thinks we abandoned her. She is waiting for us to call Audrey, and the phone is never going to ring. I stared at the satellite image, feeling a fire ignite in my chest. They thought putting her in a fortress would keep us out, but they forgot that breaking into difficult places is exactly what forensic auditors do. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. My career was on pause, my family was at war, and my bank account was frozen. But as I looked at the blank screen of my personal laptop, I realized something important. They had taken away my job title, but they could not take away my skills. I am a forensic auditor. I hunt financial ghosts for a living. And I do not need a corporate server to find public records. I wiped the tears from my cheeks and opened a new browser window. It was time to go to work. I started with my father. Thomas Miller had spent 40 years building an image of a prudent, conservative banker. He wore Italian suits and drove a Mercedes. But the public civil court records told a very different story. I paid the $15 fee to access the county clerk's database. I searched for liens and judgments against his name. The search wheel spun for a few seconds and then delivered a hit that made my jaw drop. There was a judgment filed 3 months ago by a holding company based in Las Vegas. I dug deeper into the filing. It was a debt collection for a line of credit at a major casino. The amount was staggering. $850,000. My father. The man who lectured me about saving 10% of my allowance was nearly $1 million in the hole. He was not just cash poor, he was drowning. That explained the urgency. That explained why he needed to sell Grandma's estate immediately. He was about to lose everything, and he needed her money to cover his tracks before his own creditors came knocking. Then I moved to Dante. My brother-in-law liked to brag about his real estate empire and his genius investment strategies. I pulled the property tax records for his home. It was a public document that anyone could see if they knew where to look. The title showed a second mortgage taken out 6 months ago. It was a desperate high-interest loan from a predatory lender. He had leveraged his own house to the hilt. Where did the money go? I cross-referenced his name with business filings. I found a dissolved LLC he had registered last year. The bankruptcy disclosure was painful to read. He had poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into a speculative cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed overnight. He had bet his house literally and lost. I sat back and stared at the glowing screen. The picture was finally clear. This was not just about inheritance or greed. This was panic. My father and Dante were 2 drowning men, and they had decided to use my grandmother as their life raft. They needed that lake house sold not next year, but right now. And that meant I was the only thing standing between them and their financial survival. I stared at the financial wreckage on my screen. My father was drowning, but he was the captain of the ship. He would go down with it out of pride before he ever admitted defeat. But Dante was different. Dante was just a passenger. A greedy, desperate passenger who had married into the family for a payday that was now evaporating before his eyes. He was not a Miller by blood. He did not have the same twisted loyalty to the family name that my father did. He was just a guy who liked expensive watches and easy money. He was the weak link, the crack in their armor. If I could break him, the whole conspiracy would shatter. I knew that desperate men made mistakes. They got sloppy. I pulled up his professional calendar, which was still synced to the family cloud account Brittany had forced us all to join last Christmas. She wanted to use it to track birthdays and anniversaries, but now I was using it to track her husband's lies. I noticed a pattern immediately. It was subtle, but to a forensic auditor, it stood out like a red flag. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon from 2 to 4, Dante had a block marked client consultation. But there were no addresses listed, no client names, just a blocked-out time slot that never changed regardless of holidays or weather. Real estate does not work like that. You do not show houses at the exact same time twice a week like clockwork. That is not a showing. That is a routine. I called Liam, who was already in his truck parked a few blocks away from Dante's office. I told him to wait for the black Range Rover to leave. Sure enough, at 1:45, Dante pulled out of the parking lot. But he did not head toward the wealthy suburbs where he claimed to be selling mansions. He turned south toward the industrial district. Liam tailed him, staying 2 cars back just like we had practiced. 20 minutes later, Liam called me. "You are not going to believe this, Audrey. He just pulled into the Oakwood Apartments." I typed the name into my search bar. It was a rundown complex on the south side of town where the paint was peeling and the rent was cheap. It was the kind of place Dante would usually mock. Why was a man who wore $1,000 loafers visiting a place like that? He was not selling the building. He was hiding something inside it. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. Dante was not just broke. He was living a double life. He needed money immediately, not just to pay off his crypto debts, but to maintain whatever secret he had locked behind the door of apartment 3B. I told Liam to stay put and take photos of everyone who entered or exited that unit. We had found the pressure point. Now we just had to squeeze it until he screamed. I was still staring at the photos of Dante entering the rundown apartment complex when my phone rang. It was Mr. Sterling, the attorney I had retained with the last of our savings. He was an old-school litigator who usually sounded bored by everything, but today his voice was tight with urgency. "Audrey, are you sitting down?" I sank into the kitchen chair, bracing myself for another blow. "Your father just made his move. He filed an ex parte petition this morning for emergency temporary conservatorship over Beatrice." I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew exactly what that meant. In the world of forensic accounting, a conservatorship was the nuclear option. It stripped a person of their civil rights. It meant my grandmother would no longer be a person in the eyes of the law. She would be a ward of the state, and her conservator would be her brain, her voice, and most importantly, the signer of her checks. "On what grounds?" I asked, gripping the phone. "How can a judge grant that without even seeing her?" Mr. Sterling sighed, the sound of shuffling papers audible in the background. He submitted affidavits from 2 doctors claiming she is incapacitated and a danger to herself. He is using the incident at the party as proof of her chaotic environment. He is arguing that only he can provide the stability she needs. The judge has set an emergency hearing for this Friday. That gives us exactly 5 days, Audrey. 5 days to prove she is sane before he gets the gavel. "And if he wins," I whispered, already knowing the answer. "If he wins," Mr. Sterling said, his voice grim, "Thomas gets full legal authority to liquidate her assets to pay for her care. He can list the lake house, the portfolio, the jewelry, everything. And since he has power of attorney, he can sell it all to a cash buyer within 24 hours. By the time we file an appeal, the money will be gone and the property will belong to someone else." I hung up the phone and looked at Liam. 5 days. We had 120 hours to dismantle a conspiracy that they had been building for months. My father was not just trying to silence me anymore. He was sprinting toward the finish line. He needed that conservatorship to legally launder the theft of her estate. He needed to sell the lake house to pay off his gambling debts, and he needed the law to give him permission to do it. Liam looked at the calendar on the wall and then at the photos of Dante. "We have to move now," he said. "We have the leverage on Dante. If we can break him before Friday, we can blow their whole case out of the water in court. But if we wait until the hearing, it will be too late." I nodded, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. We were done playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. Liam sat in the sweltering cab of his truck, with the engine off, trying to blend into the cracked pavement of the parking lot. He had been waiting for an hour. The Oakwood apartments were a stark contrast to the manicured lawns of my grandmother's estate. Here the air smelled of exhaust and stale cooking oil. It was the last place you would expect to find a man who drove a $90,000 Range Rover. But Dante was comfortable here. Too comfortable. I stayed on the line holding my breath as Liam whispered the play-by-play. "He is getting out of the car, Audrey. He is not carrying a briefcase or real estate contracts. He is carrying grocery bags. 2 of them. And a large box of diapers." My heart skipped a beat. Diapers. Brittany and Dante did not have children. Brittany always said kids would ruin her figure and her social calendar. "He is walking up to Unit 3B on the 2nd floor." Liam continued, his voice low and urgent. "He is not knocking. He is using a key." I heard the rapid-fire click of Liam's camera shutter through the phone speaker. "Capture every second, Liam. Do not miss a thing." The door to the apartment swung open, but Dante did not step inside immediately. Instead, a young woman stepped out. She was beautiful but tired-looking, wearing a faded nursing scrub top. She did not greet him like a business associate. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him deeply right there on the walkway. I felt a wave of nausea. My sister was a monster, but seeing her husband betray her so openly was still sickening. But the real shock came a moment later. A little boy toddled out from behind the woman's legs. He could not have been more than 2 years old. He had Dante's eyes and the same dimple in his chin. The boy raised his arms and shouted something that made my blood run cold. "Daddy!" Dante dropped the grocery bags and scooped the child up into his arms. He spun him around, laughing with a genuine warmth I had never seen him show my sister. Liam's camera kept clicking, capturing high-definition proof of the secret life Dante had been funding. The second mortgage, the crypto scams, the embezzlement. It all made perfect sense now. He was not just bad with money. He was supporting an entire second household. He was stealing from his clients, and now plotting to rob my grandmother to keep this little boy and his mother fed and housed. He was terrified that if the money ran out, his mistress would leave or worse, expose him. This was not just an affair. It was a financial liability that he was desperate to cover up. Liam waited until they went inside and closed the door before starting the truck. "We got him, Audrey," he said, his voice grim. "We have the photos, we have the address, and we have the one thing Dante values more than his reputation. We have his secret. Now let's see how much he is willing to pay to keep it." I sent Dante a text message from a burner phone with just an address and a time. The Rusty Anchor. It was a dive bar on the industrial outskirts of town where the floor was sticky with spilled beer, and the patrons knew better than to ask questions. It was the last place a man like Dante would ever be caught dead, which made it the perfect place to end his career. I sat in the darkest booth in the back, watching the door. My hands were folded on top of a thick manila envelope. I was not shaking anymore. The fear had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Dante walked in 10 minutes late. He stuck out like a sore thumb in his $3,000 Italian suit and polished loafers. He scanned the room with a look of absolute disgust before his eyes landed on me. He did not look happy. He stormed over to my booth, his face red with suppressed rage. He did not sit down. Instead, he leaned over the table, invading my personal space, and hissed at me. He asked me if I was insane. He told me that I was violating the restraining order by contacting family and that he could have me arrested right here and now. He called me desperate and pathetic. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I just took a sip of my water and waited for him to finish his tantrum. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke quietly. I told him to sit down before he attracted more attention. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. He told me to go to hell and turned to walk away. That is when I slid the envelope across the scarred wooden table. It hit his hand with a heavy thud. "Open it," I said. My voice was low, but it carried a weight that made him freeze. He looked at the envelope and then at me. He sneered, asking what garbage this was. But curiosity got the better of him. He ripped open the flap and pulled out the first photograph. It was the picture Liam had taken just hours ago. Dante kissing the woman in the doorway of apartment 3B. His face went pale. The arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer terror. His hands started to shake as he shuffled to the next photo. Him holding the toddler, him carrying the diapers. And then the final blow. The bank statements I had printed out showing the transfers from his business accounts to the crypto exchange and the payments for the apartment rent. He collapsed into the booth opposite me like his legs had suddenly given out. He stared at the photos as if hoping they would disappear. "Who else has seen these?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the jukebox. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Right now, just me and Liam. But in exactly 1 hour, I have an email scheduled to go out. It is addressed to Brittany and the State Licensing Board for Realtors." I pointed to the bank statements. "That is embezzlement, Dante. That is 5 to 10 years in federal prison. And the photos. That is a divorce that will leave you with nothing." He looked up at me, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like a trapped animal. I tapped the table with my finger. "But there is a third option," I said. "You can help me stop Thomas. You can testify that he forced you to drug Grandma. If you help me save her, I will bury these photos. I will give you a chance to fix your mess before it destroys you. You have 2 choices, Dante. Jail and ruin, or cooperation. You have 30 seconds to decide." Dante loosened his tie. His hands trembling so badly, he knocked over the salt shaker. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under the heat of my accusation. He looked at the photos of his secret son, then at me, his eyes pleading for mercy. "It was not my idea, Audrey," he stammered, his voice cracking. "It was Thomas. Your father orchestrated the whole thing. He told me it was the only way to save the family from ruin. I just wanted to borrow some money to cover my debts, but Thomas said we needed a permanent solution." He wiped a layer of cold sweat from his upper lip and leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The powder in the tea. It was not poison. It was a heavy sedative mixed with a mild hallucinogen. Thomas got it from a contact in the city. The plan was not to kill her yet. It was to make her pliable. We needed her groggy enough to sign the power of attorney, but awake enough to look conscious in front of the notary. He said if we got that signature, we would have total control." I felt sick to my stomach hearing him describe the assault on my grandmother like a business transaction. "So she signed it?" I asked, gripping the table. "Did you get the document?" Dante shook his head. "No. That is why Thomas panicked when you showed up. We were seconds away from getting her thumbprint when Liam dragged you out. That is why they filed for the emergency conservatorship instead. Plan A failed, so they moved to Plan B." "And what is the end game, Dante?" I demanded. "Why the rush?" Dante looked down at his hands. "It is the lake house, Audrey. Thomas has a buyer lined up, a commercial developer from Chicago. They are offering $5 million cash for the land. They want to tear down the house and build a luxury resort. The contract is already drafted. The closing date is set for next Monday." My breath hitched. Next Monday. That was 3 days after the court hearing. They were going to walk out of the courtroom with legal custody of Grandma and sign her home away immediately. Once the sale went through, the money would be transferred to an offshore account to pay off Thomas's gambling debts and my embezzlement before anyone could trace it. Dante looked up at me, tears forming in his eyes. "Thomas promised me $500,000 if I helped him pull this off. I needed the money for my son. I was desperate, Audrey." I stared at him with zero sympathy. "You were willing to drug an 82-year-old woman and leave her homeless to pay for your mistakes." I stood up and gathered the photos. "You are going to write down everything you just told me. Names, dates, and the details of the buyer. And then you are going to tell it to the judge. Or I send these photos to Brittany right now." I watched Dante pull out his phone with trembling fingers. He did not want to do this, but the threat of prison was a powerful motivator. I told him to text Maria, the night shift nurse who had been caring for Grandma for 5 years before she was moved. Dante had bragged earlier that he had slipped Maria $100 to keep quiet about the transfer, so I knew he had her number. He typed the message I dictated, asking her to meet me at Washington Park on her break. 30 minutes later, I was sitting on a cold park bench watching the jogging path. I was terrified she wouldn't show. But then I saw her. Maria was wearing a thick coat over her scrubs, looking over her shoulder every few seconds. She sat down next to me without saying hello. She just reached into her pocket and pressed a ball of fabric into my hand. "Your grandmother is fighting Audrey," she whispered. "She faked taking her sleeping pills last night. When I came in to check her vitals, she grabbed my wrist and told me to find you. She said you would know what to do with this." I looked down at my hand. It was an old lace handkerchief, one I had seen Grandma carry in her purse since I was a little girl. It smelled like her lavender perfume, and for a second I wanted to cry, but then I felt something stiff inside the fold. I opened it carefully. Stitched into the hem in crooked blue thread were a series of numbers and letters. 10-24-45-LM. Maria stood up to leave. She told me to be careful because Thomas had hired private security to patrol the hallway outside Grandma's room. She said she had to get back before they noticed she was gone. As she hurried away, I stared at the numbers. At first, I thought it was a phone number or an address. But then it clicked. My grandfather's name was Leonard Miller. He was born on October 24th, 1945. I gasped. It was not a date. It was a combination. Grandma had been teaching me about financial independence since I was 12. She used to take me to the bank with her every Friday. She always told me that a woman needs a secret stash that no husband or father can touch. I grabbed my phone and called Liam. "I know where the evidence is," I said, my heart racing. "It is not in the house. It is at the First National Bank downtown." She left me the combination to her safety deposit box. And if she went to the trouble of smuggling this out of a high-security facility, whatever is inside that box is powerful enough to destroy them all. The lobby of First National Bank was quiet and smelled of old money and lemon polish. I felt entirely out of place in my jeans and sneakers, surrounded by marble pillars and men in expensive suits. I approached the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told the bank manager I needed to access safety deposit box 402. He looked at me over his glasses and asked for my identification. I handed him my driver's license, praying that Grandma's memory hadn't failed her. If my name wasn't on the list, I would be escorted out by security, just like at the party. The manager typed into his computer for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked up and smiled. "You have been an authorized signatory on this box since 2014, Ms. Miller. Your grandmother added you the day you graduated from college." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I had completely forgotten. That was the day she told me she was proud of me for choosing a career in truth-seeking. She had given me a key back then, but I had lost it years ago. Luckily, the manager said I only needed my fingerprint and the combination to get in. He led me into the vault, a steel room lined from floor to ceiling with metal drawers. He left me alone with box 402. My hands were shaking as I reached for the dial. 10 right, 24 left, 45 right. I stopped and whispered the letters LM. It was a digital keypad for the final entry. I typed in the letters. The lock clicked with a heavy, satisfying sound. I pulled the long metal drawer out and set it on the table. I took a deep breath, expecting to see stacks of cash or the family emeralds that Brittany always talked about. I lifted the lid. The box was almost empty. There was no money, no jewelry, just a single thin manila folder and a silver USB drive taped to the inside cover. I felt a pang of disappointment. How was this going to save her? I needed leverage, not paperwork. I opened the folder. Inside were medical records from 5 years ago. I scanned them quickly. They were from a neurologist, Dr. Aris. The diagnosis was clear. Beatrice Miller has full cognitive function, no signs of dementia. But the notes in the margin were what caught my eye. Patient expresses concern that son Thomas is inquiring about competency hearings. Patient requests testing to prove sanity in case of future legal challenges. She knew. She had known for years that her own son was coming for her. She had been building a defense file while we were all eating Thanksgiving turkey. I looked at the silver USB drive. It was labeled simply, evidence. I grabbed it, feeling the cold metal in my palm. This wasn't just a safety deposit box, it was a time bomb. and Grandma Beatrice had just handed me the detonator. I plugged the silver drive into my laptop sitting in the passenger seat of Liam's truck. My hands were trembling so hard I had to click the file twice to open it. A video window popped up. The timestamp was from 6 months ago. Grandma Beatrice appeared on the screen. She was sitting in her study wearing her favorite silk robe, looking directly into the camera lens with eyes that were clear and sharp. "Hello, Audrey," she began, her voice steady. "If you are watching this, it means Thomas has finally made his move. I hope you are safe." I covered my mouth to stifle a sob. She looked so alive, so much stronger than the frail woman I had seen slumped in that chair yesterday. She leaned closer to the camera. "I know about the tea," she whispered. "I know my son has been slipping sedatives into my evening blend since Christmas. He thinks I am getting senile. He thinks I do not notice the bitterness or the way I lose hours of my day afterwards." Liam gripped the steering wheel, staring at the screen. "She knew," he murmured. "She knew the whole time." On the screen, Grandma reached for a stack of papers. "I stopped drinking it 3 months ago," she continued. "I pour it into the potted plant by the window. The poor thing died last week. But I have to play along, Audrey. I have to let Thomas believe he is winning. It is the only way to catch him in the act." She held up a document with a red seal. "This is why you are here. Thomas is going to try to declare me incompetent. He will bring doctors and judges to prove I am losing my mind. But I have set a trap, a legal trap so specific that only a greedy man would fall into it." She smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye that reminded me exactly where I got my fighting spirit from. "I have drafted a dormant amendment to the family trust," she explained. "It activates only under one condition. If any family member successfully petitions for my conservatorship against my written objection, they immediately trigger a forfeiture clause. But it is not just disinheritance, Audrey. It transfers the liability of the shell company Thomas uses for his gambling debts directly to the conservator." My jaw dropped. The shell company. The one with the millions in tax liens I had found earlier. She had tied the anchor around her own neck, knowing that Thomas would be the only one eager enough to grab the rope. "He will think he is signing for my assets," Grandma said. "But he will be signing a confession to tax fraud and assuming a debt that will bury him. He digs his own grave with every legal document he files." The video ended with a direct instruction. "Do not stop him, Audrey. Let him file the papers. Let him stand in front of that judge. I need him to commit the crime fully so we can close the door on him forever. I love you, my brave girl. Now go finish this." The screen went black. I looked at Liam. The fear in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold, hard adrenaline. We did not need to stop the hearing. We needed to make sure Thomas showed up. Liam reached for the door handle, ready to sprint back into the bank and demand certified copies of everything. But I grabbed his arm with a grip of steel. "Wait. We cannot use this yet." He looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Audrey, we have a video of her confessing everything. We have the proof. We can stop the hearing right now." I shook my head, staring at the frozen image of my grandmother on the laptop screen. "No, Liam. If we stop them now, they will just find another way. They will claim the video is a deepfake or that she was confused when she made it. My father will slip away again just like he always does." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the gamble I was about to take. Grandma is right. We cannot just stop them. We have to destroy them. We have to let them walk into the courtroom. We have to let them stand before a judge and lie under oath. We have to let Thomas file those papers so that the trap snaps shut on his neck. We are going to let them think they have won until the very last second. We need them to commit the crime fully so there is no coming back from it. Liam looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. "You want to bait them?" he asked. I nodded. "I want them to feel safe. I want them so arrogant that they do not even check the fine print of the trust. And I know exactly how to do it." I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had hoped never to use. It was the direct line to Marcus Thorne, my father's ruthless estate attorney, the man who had drafted the restraining order against me. The phone rang twice before a smooth, condescending voice answered. "Ms. Miller, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I took a moment to compose myself, channeling every ounce of exhaustion and defeat I had felt over the last 48 hours. I put on the performance of a lifetime. I made my voice sound small and broken. I am tired, Mr. Thorne. I cannot afford this legal battle. I saw the restraining order, and I know I cannot beat my father's resources. I want to make a deal. I could practically hear him smiling on the other end. A deal. I am listening. I swallowed my pride and delivered the lie that would seal their fate. I will sign an affidavit agreeing to the conservatorship. I will admit that I was emotional and confused at the party. But I want something in return. I need $150,000. My husband and I have debts. If Thomas pays us off, I will sign the papers and disappear. Thorne did not even hesitate. He did not question why the righteous daughter was suddenly asking for a payout. He just saw an easy win. He saw a way to give his client exactly what he wanted without a messy trial. I will draft the settlement immediately, he said, his tone triumphant. Be at my office tomorrow at 9. Bring your husband. And Ms. Miller, smart choice. I hung up the phone and looked at Liam. The line was dead, but the trap was set. Now we just had to walk into the lion's den and pray we didn't get eaten alive before Friday. The glass doors of Marcus Thorne's law firm slid open with a hush that screamed money. I had spent an hour in front of the mirror before we left, trying to look like a woman on the edge of a nervous breakdown. I wore no makeup, let my hair hang limp, and wore a sweater that was slightly too big. Liam held my arm not protectively this time, but as if he was holding me up. We walked into the conference room, and there they were. My father sat at the head of the mahogany table looking like a king on his throne. Brittany was next to him scrolling on her phone looking bored. They did not even stand up when we entered. Thomas gestured to the empty chairs opposite him. You look terrible, Audrey, he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I guess reality is finally setting in. I slumped into the chair, keeping my eyes on the table. I cannot do this anymore, Dad, I whispered, letting my voice tremble. The legal fees. We cannot afford them. And Liam's landscaping business took a hit last quarter. We are drowning. I felt Liam stiffen beside me. It was a lie, of course. His business was thriving. But we needed a story that Thomas would believe. We needed to appeal to his vanity. He had to believe we were desperate, poor, and easily bought. Brittany let out a sharp laugh. I told you, Dad. She does not care about Grandma. She just wants a payout. I looked up at her, putting on my best desperate face. I need $150,000, I said quickly before I lost my nerve. Cash. Today. If you give us the money, I will sign whatever you want. I will sign the affidavit stating that Grandma has been confused and aggressive. I will withdraw my objection to the conservatorship. I just want out. Thomas looked at Marcus Thorne, his shark of a lawyer. Thorne nodded slightly. It is a small price to pay for a guaranteed victory, Thomas, he said smoothly. It stops the investigation and seals the record. Thomas pulled a checkbook from his jacket pocket. He looked at me with pure contempt. I always knew you were weak, Audrey. He sneered, scribbling his signature with a flourish. You have no loyalty, just like your mother. He slid the check across the polished wood. It sat there between us, a bribe disguised as a lifeline. I reached out and took it, my fingers brushing against the paper. It felt dirty. Then Thorne pushed the affidavit toward me. Sign here, he commanded, handing me a heavy gold pen, admitting that Beatrice Miller lacks capacity, and that you support the emergency petition. I took the pen. I hesitated for just a second to sell the performance. Then I bent down and signed my name. I pressed hard into the paper, making sure the signature was bold and clear. I was not signing my grandmother's life away. I was signing my father's death warrant. I was giving him exactly what he wanted, so that when the trap snapped shut, he would have no one to blame but himself. I stood up, clutching the check. We are done here, I said, turning to leave. Thomas laughed behind me. Smart girl, Audrey. Do not spend it all in one place. I walked out the door and did not let myself smile until we were inside the elevator. They took the bait. I watched my father tear the check from the book with a violent rip. The sound echoed in the silent boardroom like a gunshot. He held it out to me, not with the generosity of a parent helping a child, but with the disdain of a master paying off a troublesome servant. He knew as well as I did that the funds were not actually in his account yet. He was writing checks against a future that had not happened yet, banking entirely on the sale of Grandma's estate to cover this bribe. It was the ultimate gambler's move. He was betting money he did not have to silence the only person who could stop him from getting it. Brittany leaned back in her leather chair, twirling a lock of hair around her finger. She looked at the check and then at me, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "So, that is the price of your integrity, Audrey," she purred. $150,000. I honestly thought you would hold out for more, but I guess you finally realized what your actual value is to this family. You are cheap, just like your suit. She laughed, a cruel tinkling sound that made Liam tense up beside me. I squeezed his hand, signaling him to stay quiet. Let them gloat. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. I did not rise to the bait. I kept my face blank, a mask of defeat. I reached for the affidavit, the document that would supposedly hand them the keys to the kingdom. Marcus Thorne pushed the heavy gold pen toward me. "Sign at the bottom. Ms. Miller," he instructed, his voice bored, "and initial each page." I picked up the pen. I am right-handed. I have been right-handed my entire life. My father knows this. Brittany knows this. But they were so blinded by their victory that they were not paying attention to the details. As the tip of the pen hovered over the signature line, I shifted it subtly into my left hand. It was a forensic auditor's trick. A signature made with the non-dominant hand has microscopic tremors and pressure points that are impossible to replicate naturally. To the naked eye, it just looked like a sloppy signature from a distraught woman. But under a forensic microscope, it would look like a signature made under duress or by a different person entirely. It was a small detail, a failsafe that I could use later if things went wrong. I scratched my name onto the paper. The lines were jagged and uneven. The A in Audrey was too sharp. The loop in Miller was broken. Perfect. I pushed the document back across the table. Thomas snatched it up, blowing on the ink as if he had just signed a peace treaty. He did not even look at the signature. He was too busy counting his imaginary millions. "There you go," Thomas said, waving his hand dismissively. "Now take your money and get out. Do not come to the hearing. Do not call the hospital. You are out of the will and out of our lives." Brittany smirked, checking her reflection in her phone screen. "Don't worry, Audrey. We will send you a postcard from the new resort." I took the check and folded it neatly into my pocket. I did not say thank you. I did not say goodbye. I just grabbed Liam's hand and turned my back on them. They thought they had just bought my silence. They had no idea they had just documented their own corruption. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out their smug faces, I finally let out a breath. They were so arrogant they never even checked to see which hand held the pen. My father wasted no time. The moment the elevator doors closed on me, he was already reaching for his phone. He had the golden ticket in his hand. My affidavit was the only thing standing between him and total control, and now that he had it, he saw no reason to wait until Friday. He was a man drowning in debt, and he needed to gasp for air immediately. An hour later, I received an urgent notification from the county court electronic filing system. My heart stopped as I read the update. The hearing for the conservatorship of Beatrice Miller had been rescheduled. It was no longer set for Friday. It was moved to tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thomas had cited a medical emergency, claiming that Grandma's condition was deteriorating rapidly and that immediate legal intervention was required to approve a life-saving procedure. It was a lie, of course. The only emergency was his gambling debt coming due. Liam paced the kitchen floor when I told him. "He is rushing it, Audrey. He is trying to catch us off guard." But I shook my head. "No, he is not trying to outsmart us. He is just greedy. He wants the money before the weekend so he can pay off the casino sharks." Then came the second confirmation. Liam's contact in the real estate office sent us a screenshot of an email chain. Thomas had messaged the buyers, the private developers from Chicago, who wanted to bulldoze the estate. The subject line read, "Closing schedule." The message was brief and arrogant. "I will have the court order in hand by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Meet me at the title company at noon. Have the wire transfer ready." He was selling the house literally 2 hours after the hearing. He was so confident that the judge would bang that gavel in his favor that he had already scheduled the celebration. He was treating the court proceeding like a formality, a minor speed bump on his way to the bank. I looked at the clock. We had lost 2 days of preparation time. We had less than 24 hours to finalize our strategy to prep Dante and to make sure Grandma was ready for her close-up. The timeline was tight enough to snap, but in a way, it was perfect. Thomas was sprinting so fast toward the finish line that he would not notice the tripwire until his foot was already snagged on it. I grabbed my laptop. "Get the coffee, Liam. It is going to be a long night." While my father was popping the cork on a $300 bottle of vintage champagne, I was sitting in the dark checking the battery level on my laptop for the 5th time. According to the stream of text messages lighting up my phone, the party in the penthouse suite was in full swing. Dante told me that Thomas was already spending the money in his head bragging about the new boat he planned to buy and the European vacation he promised Brittany. They were drunk on arrogance, convinced that the game was over, and they were holding the trophy. But Dante was not drinking. He sent me a message that made my blood run cold. "They have Dr. Evans. He is prepped. He is going to testify that he evaluated her yesterday and she did not even know her own name." I showed the screen to Liam. Dr. Evans was a concierge physician known in our circle as the doctor you call when you want a prescription, no questions asked. If he was willing to perjure himself to say my grandmother had dementia without even examining her, my father must have promised him a cut of the sale. It was sickening. They were building a fortress of lies brick by brick. Liam and I were not celebrating. We were camped out on the living room floor, surrounded by a war room of evidence. The only light came from the blue glow of the computer screen. We looked like we were preparing for a siege. And we were. I picked up the USB drive, weighing it in my palm. It felt impossibly light for something that contained enough power to destroy a dynasty. I checked the file again. Grandma's voice filled the quiet room, sharp and clear. I paused it on her face. She looked so strong. I could not let her down. We went through the checklist one last time. The trust amendment with the poison pill clause. Check. The forensic analysis of my father's gambling debts. Check. The photos of Dante's double life and his signed confession, which we had forced him to notarize an hour ago. Check. And finally, the live video link to the safe house where Maria the nurse was guarding Grandma like a hawk. Liam handed me a fresh mug of coffee. His eyes were tired, but his hands were steady. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "You know what they will do when the trap snaps. They will not go down quietly, Audrey. They will scream. They will lie. They will try to take you down with them." I took a sip of the bitter coffee and looked at the clock. It was midnight. In 9 hours I would walk into that courtroom and look my father in the eye. "I am not afraid of them anymore," I said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. "I am just afraid of what I might do if they get away with it." "Go to sleep, Liam. We have a family to bury in the morning." The alarm went off at 5 a.m. I put on my navy blue power suit, the one I usually saved for federal indictments. I drank my coffee black, standing by the window watching the sunrise over a day that would either end in justice or ruin. At 7:30 we grabbed the evidence bag and walked out to the driveway. I stopped dead in my tracks. My car was leaning to the left at a sickening angle. I dropped my bag. All 4 tires were slashed. They were not just flat, they were shredded. The rubber hung in ribbons, exposing the metal rims. It was violent and personal. On the windshield, someone had used red lipstick to scrawl a smiley face. It was my father's way of saying, "Stay home, little girl." He knew that if I missed the roll call at 9 a.m., the judge would grant the conservatorship by default. He was not just gambling on the outcome, he was rigging the game to ensure I never even made it to the table. I felt panic rise in my throat, hot and suffocating. "Liam, we are stuck. It will take an hour to get a tow truck and another hour to get a rental. We are going to miss the hearing." I reached for my phone, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. But Liam did not look surprised. He did not even look angry. He just looked at the ruined car and shook his head with a grim satisfaction. "Amateur move," he muttered. He checked his watch and then pointed down the street. A black Suburban with tinted windows was idling 3 houses down. I booked it last night, Audrey, Liam said, guiding me away from our useless vehicle. I figured Thomas would try to physically stop us. If it wasn't the tires, it would have been a blocked driveway or a fake emergency call. I did not want to leave anything to chance. I stared at him. You knew they would do this. Liam opened the back door of the waiting car for me. I knew they are desperate, and desperate people get nasty. I looked at my husband with a surge of gratitude. He had outplayed them before the game even started. We climbed into the back of the hired car. The leather was cool and the air conditioning hummed quietly. Liam leaned forward to the driver. The county courthouse, please. But do not drop us at the main entrance where the cameras are. Go to the loading dock on the south side. We are entering through the service doors. As we pulled away, I looked back at my house and the vandalized car in the driveway. It was a symbol of how low my family was willing to sink. They thought a few slashed tires would keep me away. They thought fear would paralyze me. But as we merged onto the highway, speeding toward the confrontation that would end this war, I realized they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had just given me one more piece of evidence to bury them with. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a groan that echoed through the silent chamber like a thunderclap. I stepped inside. Liam was right behind me, his presence a solid wall against the hostility in the room. I saw them instantly. Thomas was leaning back in his chair, whispering something to Brittany, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. They looked like tourists on a vacation, not grieving relatives at a competency hearing. When they heard the doors, they turned. The color drained from my father's face so fast he looked like a corpse. Brittany dropped her compact. It clattered onto the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces just like their confidence. They stared at me with their mouths slightly open. They had slashed my tires. They had paid me off with a check that was probably bouncing as we spoke. They thought I was crying at home or stranded on the side of the highway. Instead, I was standing 10 feet away, in my Navy forensic suit, ready to burn them down. Marcus Thorne. My father's lawyer recovered first. He stood up, smoothing his expensive tie, and forced a tight smile. Your Honor, it appears Ms. Miller has decided to join us after all. He shot me a warning look, a look that said, take the money and shut up or I will ruin you. Judge Hamilton peered over his reading glasses. He held the affidavit I had signed with my left hand the day before. Ms. Miller, he said, his voice booming, I have reviewed the filings. I see we have a signed agreement here. You are withdrawing your objection to the conservatorship and confirming your grandmother's incapacity. Is that correct? He looked at the clock, clearly annoyed that I had interrupted the rubber stamping of his morning docket. You are just here to formalize the record, I assume. The room went dead silent. My father exhaled slowly, thinking the danger had passed. He thought I was there to surrender. I walked past the bar and stood directly in front of the bench. I did not look at the gallery. I did not look at the bailiff. I looked straight at the judge. No, Your Honor, I said loudly enough for the court reporter to hear every syllable. I am not here to confirm a lie. Thomas slammed his hand on the table. Objection! My father shouted, losing his composure entirely. She signed the papers. She took the settlement. This is a waste of the court's time. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel, silencing him. Ms. Miller, explain yourself immediately. Why are you here if not to support the petition? I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt electric. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the USB drive and the forensic report on the bank signatures. I am here to report a crime, Your Honor. I said, my voice steady and cold. I am here to report a conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and grand larceny. And the people responsible are sitting right there at the plaintiff's table. Objection, Your Honor. Marcus Thorne shot up from his chair, his face turning a shade of crimson that clashed with his silk tie. This is an ambush. Ms. Miller has no standing here. She accepted a settlement payment yesterday and waived her right to contest these proceedings. This is a breach of contract and a flagrant abuse of the judicial process. He pointed a shaking finger at me, trying to regain control of a narrative that was rapidly spiraling out of his grasp. I ask that the court remove her immediately and proceed with the ruling. Judge Hamilton lowered his gavel slowly, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. He looked from the sweating lawyer to me. Ms. Miller, you are skating on thin ice. You claimed a moment ago to have evidence of a crime. If this is a delay tactic, I will hold you in contempt and grant the conservatorship by default. Do you understand? I understand perfectly, Your Honor, I said, stepping forward and placing the silver USB drive on the clerk's desk. This drive contains a video diary recorded by Beatrice Miller herself, dated just 2 weeks ago. It contradicts every affidavit my father has filed. It proves that she is not only competent, but that she is the victim of a calculated plot to induce a state of artificial dementia. The judge hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded to the bailiff. Play it. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector as the screen descended from the ceiling. Thomas gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He knew what was coming. He tried to signal Brittany to do something, but she was frozen, staring at the blank screen in horror. Then Grandma's face appeared. It was projected 10 feet high, larger than life, and undeniable. She was sitting in her library, looking straight into the camera. My name is Beatrice Miller. She began, her voice echoing through the courtroom, clear and authoritative. I am recording this statement because my son Thomas Miller is attempting to have me declared legally incompetent. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The reporters in the back row started typing furiously. On the screen, Grandma held up a small plastic bag containing the tea leaves. He has been drugging me, she continued, her eyes locking with the lens. He slips sedatives into my evening tea to make me appear confused in front of visitors. He is doing this because he has gambling debts that exceed his own net worth, and he needs to liquidate my estate to save himself. Thomas made a noise like a strangled cat. He stood up halfway as if to run, but sat back down when he saw the bailiff move toward him. On the screen, Grandma delivered the final blow. If this video is being played in court, it means he has succeeded in silencing me. Do not let him win. I am not sick. I am being hunted. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Judge Hamilton slowly removed his glasses. He did not look at the papers on his desk. He looked directly at my father, Mr. Thorne. The judge said, his voice dangerously low. You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why your client should not be taken into custody right now. Thomas turned to me, his eyes filled with pure hatred. But I just smiled. The trap had snapped shut. Your Honor. I have one more piece of evidence. I pointed to the back of the room where the heavy double doors were slowly opening. But this evidence is not digital, it is breathing. I called Dante Ricci to the stand. The air left the room. Brittany whipped her head around so fast, her diamond earrings blurred. She stared at her husband, who was walking down the center aisle flanked by 2 federal marshals. He was not wearing his signature Italian suit today. He was wearing a plain gray shirt, and he looked like a man walking to his own execution. He refused to look at the plaintiff's table. He refused to look at his wife. Dante. What the hell are you doing? Brittany screamed, standing up and knocking her chair over. You are supposed to be at the office. Shut your mouth, Dante. The bailiff moved instantly, putting a hand on her shoulder and forcing her back into her seat. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel so hard the wood handle cracked. One more outburst, Mrs. Ricci, and you will be removed in handcuffs. Sit down. Dante took the stand. He was shaking so badly that the microphone rattled when he touched it. He looked at me for a split second, his eyes begging for the mercy I had promised him in the dark corner of that dive bar. I nodded slightly. The deal was simple. He gives me Thomas, and I give him a chance to see his son grow up from outside a prison cell. State your name for the record, the clerk said. Dante cleared his throat twice before speaking. Dante Ricci. Mr. Ricci, do you recognize the video evidence just shown to this court? Asked the district attorney, who had stepped in after seeing the video. Dante nodded, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, it is true. All of it. Tell the court your involvement, the attorney pressed. Dante closed his eyes. Thomas Miller approached me 6 months ago. He told me he was in debt to loan sharks in Vegas for nearly $1 million. He said if he did not pay them, they would kill him. He came up with a plan to force Beatrice into a conservatorship so he could sell the lake estate. But she was too sharp. She would not fail the cognitive tests. So what did you do? Dante took a shuddering breath. Thomas gave me a powder, a sedative mixed with a hallucinogen. He told me to put it in her tea every Tuesday and Thursday when I visited. He said it would make her look senile. I did it. I poisoned her tea for 3 months, and the medical evaluation. Dante looked down at his hands. Dr. Evans was paid $50,000 to falsify the report. The money came from the account of the Chicago developers who are buying the land. They are waiting at the title company right now. The sale is scheduled for noon today. Brittany let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hands as she looked from her husband to her father. Thomas sat like a stone statue, his face devoid of color, his eyes fixed on the wall. He knew it was over. Dante had just handed the prosecution a roadmap to the entire conspiracy. I have a deal, Dante blurted out, looking at the judge. I have immunity for the assault charges. I am testifying as a cooperating witness. I am only facing the fraud counts. The judge looked at him with undisguised disgust. We will discuss your plea deal later, Mr. Ricci. Right now, you have just admitted to participating in the slow poisoning of a vulnerable adult. He turned his gaze to my father. Thomas Miller, stand up. Your Honor. The plaintiff claims Beatrice Miller is lost in a fog of dementia. They claim she is a danger to herself and requires the benevolent control of her son to survive the week. I move to let her answer that accusation herself. Right now. Live. Judge Hamilton looked at me over his spectacles. He was done with the theatrics, but the gravity of Dante's confession had shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. He nodded once at the clerk. Grant the connection. The massive projection screen behind the judge flickered from black to blue. The courtroom went deadly silent as the pixels resolved into a sharp, high-definition image. It was not a hospital bed. It was not the sterile luxury of the Serenity nursing home. The background was a cinder-block wall, painted a drab institutional gray. In the corner of the frame stood a uniformed police sergeant, and sitting in the center of the shot, looking tired, but sitting bolt upright with the posture of a queen, was Beatrice Miller. A collective gasp ripped through the gallery. Thomas looked up at the screen, and his face went from pale to a sick shade of gray. He gripped the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. Nurse Maria had done her job perfectly. While we were distracting Thomas and his lawyers with this sham hearing, she had wheeled Grandma out the service exit of the secure facility before the morning shift change. She had driven her straight to the one place Thomas's money could not reach. The downtown police precinct. Hello, Thomas, Grandma said. Her voice was amplified through the courtroom speakers, crisp and undeniable. It did not waver. It did not sound like the voice of a confused elderly woman. It sounded like Judgment Day. I am speaking to you from the safety of the 3rd precinct. She continued, her eyes locking onto the camera lens as if she could see right into his soul. I have just concluded a 2-hour interview with Detective Miller regarding your administration of my medication and your attempts to isolate me from my family. Thomas tried to stand up. Your Honor. This is a trick, he stammered, his voice cracking. She is being manipulated. She does not know where she is. Beatrice cut him off with a sharp laugh that echoed through the room. I know exactly where I am, Thomas. I am sitting in an interrogation room because my own son decided that my life was less important than his gambling debts. I know the date. I know the name of the president. And I know that you signed a contract to sell my home to a developer at noon today. She leaned forward, and the camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the steel in her eyes. I am of sound mind and body. I am fully cognizant of my surroundings, and I am formally requesting that this court deny your petition for conservatorship with prejudice. Furthermore, I am instructing my granddaughter Audrey to hand over the trust amendment I signed 6 months ago, the one that transfers your debts to your own name. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Thomas slumped back into his chair, defeated. But Beatrice was not finished. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, I would like the record to show that I am pressing full criminal charges against Thomas Miller and Brittany Ritchie for attempted murder fraud and elder abuse. I want them arrested. Now. The gavel struck the mahogany block with a sound that cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot, ending the war instantly. Judge Hamilton did not look at the paperwork anymore. He looked at my father with a cold, absolute fury. The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied with prejudice, he announced, his voice booming off the walls. Furthermore, based on the sworn testimony of Mr. Ricci and the compelling video evidence provided by the victim, I am finding probable cause for immediate detainee. Bailiff, take Thomas Miller and Brittany Ricci into custody. The courtroom erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. Brittany let out a high-pitched shriek as a female officer grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back. She looked at her father, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Do something, Dad," she screamed. "Fix this." But Thomas was not looking at her. He was staring at the judge, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He shook off the bailiff's hand and slammed his fists onto the table. "You cannot do this," he roared, saliva flying from his mouth. "I am the patriarch of this family. That house is my birthright. Even if you lock me up, the property is still mine. I am her only son. I am the sole heir. You cannot touch my inheritance." I stepped forward calmly, sliding a single document across the table toward the judge. "Actually, that is not entirely true." Thomas froze. He looked at the paper. It was the dormant amendment to the family trust, the trap Grandma Beatrice had told me about in the video, the one he had triggered the moment he filed his petition. "Read Clause 4, Section B." I said, my voice cutting through his shouting. "It states clearly that any beneficiary who attempts to place the grantor under a conservatorship against their expressed written objection forfeits their entire share of the estate." I looked him dead in the eye. "You are not the heir anymore, Thomas. You are disinherited, effective immediately." Thomas snatched the paper, his hands shaking so violently he tore the corner. He scanned the legal jargon, his eyes bulging as the reality sank in. "But it gets better." I continued, enjoying the look of horror dawning on his face. "The amendment also contains a liability transfer clause. The shell company you used to hide your gambling debts, the one with the tax liens, was technically a subsidiary of the family trust. But since you acted in bad faith, the trust has severed ties with that entity." I leaned in close, so only he could hear me over the chaos of the courtroom. "The debt is no longer sheltered by the estate, Thomas. It is personal now. You owe the casino and the IRS $4 million. And you do not have a house to sell to pay for it. You are not just going to prison. You are going to prison penniless." The fight went out of him. He slumped against the bailiff, his legs giving way. He looked at the paper, then at me, then at the empty space where his future used to be. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who had gambled his soul and lost. The bailiffs hauled him away, his expensive loafers dragging on the floor, while Brittany sobbed in the background. I turned to Liam, and for the first time in 3 days I felt my shoulders drop. The monster was not just slain, he was bankrupt. The handcuffs were already clicking shut around my father's wrists, but he was still fighting. He was purple with rage, thrashing against the bailiff like a trapped animal. "You cannot do this!" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I am the executor. I am the only one who knows how to run the estate. That money is mine. You are making a mistake, Mr. Sterling." My attorney stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a document with a blue cover. He waited for Thomas to take a breath before sliding the paper across the defense table. "Actually, Mr. Miller, the mistake was yours. Do you recognize this signature?" Thomas stopped, struggling for a second. He squinted at the document. It was the frantic authorization he had signed last week, the one he thought gave him immediate power to list the lake house on the market before the court hearing. "Yes," he spat. "That is the transfer of control. It proves I am in charge of Miller Holdings, LLC." Sterling smiled a thin, shark-like smile. You should have read the bylaws, Thomas. Miller Holdings, LLC, is a shell company my client Beatrice Miller created 10 years ago. It has exactly one function. It holds the family's tax liabilities. The blood drained from my father's face. What are you talking about? Sterling turned to the judge. Your Honor, this document is a voluntary assumption of liability. When Mr. Miller signed it in his haste to seize control of the assets, he also agreed to become the sole guarantor for the company's outstanding debts. He pointed to the bottom line. Miller Holdings is currently the subject of a federal audit. It owes the IRS $2.5 million in back taxes and penalties. The courtroom went deadly silent. Even Brittany stopped sobbing to stare at her father. Thomas looked like he had been punched in the gut. $2.5 million, he whispered. Sterling nodded. By signing this document to fast-track your access to the accounts, you bypassed the trust's protections. You personally assumed that debt. The estate is no longer liable. You are. The IRS will be seizing your personal assets, your car, your house, and your retirement fund to satisfy the lien. I stepped closer to him, watching the realization destroy him. Grandma Beatrice told me about this trap years ago. She knew that a good steward would read every line of a contract, but a greedy man would only look for the signature line. She built a poison pill into the legacy, Thomas. She knew you would come for the money eventually, so she wrapped it in a debt that would bankrupt you. Thomas sagged in the bailiff's grip, his legs finally giving out. He wasn't just going to jail. He was going to prison destitute. He had tried to steal a fortune, and instead he had signed away his entire life. The officer pulled him upright. Let's go, Mr. Miller. You have a lot of paperwork to fill out downtown. As they dragged him away, he didn't scream anymore. He just stared at the floor, crushed by the weight of his own avarice. Grandma had played the long game, and she had won. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight around my father's wrists was a mechanical finality that severed the tension in the room like a guillotine. It was a cold, sharp click that signaled the end of the Miller dynasty. Thomas did not fight the bailiff this time. The revelation of the tax liability had broken his spine. He stood there with his expensive suit jacket bunched up around his shoulders, staring at the empty air in front of him. His lips moved silently, counting numbers that no longer added up. He was doing the math of his own destruction, realizing that even if he somehow avoided prison, he would walk out of this courtroom into a life of absolute poverty. The IRS would strip the paint off the walls of his mansion before they were done with him. Beside him, Brittany was unraveling with a much louder and messier desperation. When the female officer reached for her arm, Brittany recoiled as if she had been burned. "Do not touch me," she shrieked, her voice pitching up into a hysterical range that made the court reporter wince. "You cannot arrest me. I did nothing wrong. I am a victim here. My father made me do it." She was throwing him under the bus without a second of hesitation. The loyalty she had preached about for years, the importance of family unity that she used to manipulate me, was instantly discarded the moment the steel touched her skin. She looked around the room frantically, her eyes darting for a lifeline. They landed on Dante. He was sitting on the witness bench, his head in his hands. He was not being arrested. He was sitting there with the immunity deal I had brokered for him, a heavy, invisible shield protecting him from the immediate chaos. The realization hit Brittany with the force of a physical blow. Her face twisted from fear into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. "You," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at her husband. "You did this, you rat! You told them everything, didn't you?" Dante did not look up. He could not look at her. He just hunched his shoulders tighter, trying to make himself small. Brittany lunged toward him, but the officer caught her by the waist, dragging her back. "You coward," she spat, struggling against the restraint. "I gave you everything. I let you live in my house. I let you spend my father's money. And this is how you repay us. You sold us out to her." Dante finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked at his wife not with anger, but with a profound and tragic pity. "I did it for Leo," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the commotion. "I did it so our son would not have two parents in federal prison. I did it because, unlike you, Brittany, I know when to stop digging the grave." Brittany screamed a raw, guttural sound of rage. She did not care about her son. She did not care about justice. She only cared that she had lost. The officers began to move them toward the side exit, the path reserved for criminals in custody. Thomas walked like a zombie, his feet dragging on the floor, his eyes glazed over. He passed by the plaintiff's table where I stood. For a fleeting second he paused. He looked at me. I expected anger. I expected him to curse me or spit at me, but there was nothing, no recognition, no regret. He looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just witnessed a traffic accident. He was already gone lost in the nightmare of his own financial ruin. Brittany, however, was not done. As they dragged her through the heavy double doors, she turned her head back toward me. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her mascara was running in dark streaks down her cheeks, and her face was blotchy with tears. "You are dead to us, Audrey," she screamed, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Do not think you won. You have no family left. You are an orphan. You hear me. You are nothing." The doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The silence that rushed back into the courtroom was heavy and suffocating. The bailiffs began to clear the gallery, ushering out the reporters who were already typing their headlines on their phones. The show was over. The villains had been vanquished. I stood perfectly still, clutching the edge of the table. My knuckles were white. Liam stepped up beside me, placing a warm hand on the small of my back. He did not say a word. He knew that any words of celebration would be inappropriate. We had won. We had saved Grandma Beatrice. We had stopped the theft of the estate. We had exposed the truth. But as I looked at the empty chairs where my father and sister had just been sitting, I did not feel a surge of triumph. I did not feel the rush of victory that lawyers talk about in movies. I felt a profound, exhausting hollowness. I felt the weight of the last 20 years finally crashing down on me. I watched the dust motes dancing in the beam of light from the upper windows. I thought about the birthdays we had celebrated, the Christmas dinners, where we pretended to like each other, the family vacations, where we smiled for photos while hiding the rot underneath. It was all a lie. All of it. And today, I had finally taken a sledgehammer to the facade. Brittany was right about one thing. I was an orphan now. Not by death, but by necessity. I had surgically removed the cancer from my life, but the surgery had left a gaping wound. I looked at the judge who was gathering his papers. He gave me a brief, solemn nod. It was a look of respect, but also of sympathy. He knew what it cost to do what I had just done. Liam squeezed my shoulder gently, grounding me back in the present. "Audrey," he said softly, "it is over. They cannot hurt her anymore. And they cannot hurt you." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale courtroom air. It tasted different now. It tasted clean. The fear was gone. The anxiety about checking my bank account or wondering what lie Brittany was spreading about me was gone. The constant low-level hum of dread that had been the soundtrack of my life for as long as I could remember had finally been silenced. I looked at Liam and managed a small, tired smile. "I know," I said. "I am not happy, Liam. I do not think I can be happy about sending my father to prison. But I am relieved. I feel like I have been holding my breath since I was 10 years old, and I can finally exhale." I picked up my briefcase. It felt lighter. I turned away from the empty defense table and looked toward the back of the room where the projection screen was still glowing blue. The connection to the police station had been cut, but I could still see Grandma's fierce eyes in my mind. She was waiting for me. She was safe. And for the first time in a long time, the future did not look like a trap. It looked like a blank page. "Let's go get her," I said to Liam. "Let's go get Grandma and take her home. Not to the estate, not to the mansion. To our home. Where she is safe." We walked down the center aisle, our footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I did not look back at the doors where my family had been taken away. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding midday sun, leaving the wreckage of the Miller dynasty behind me in the shadows. The war was over. And I was the last one standing. The seasons turned from the humid heat of that courtroom drama to a crisp, biting autumn. It has been 6 months since the gavel fell, and the landscape of my life has been bulldozed and rebuilt from the ground up. The Miller dynasty is dead. It did not die with a bang, but with the quiet scratching of pens on asset forfeiture forms. The empire my father built on debt and deceit has been dismantled piece by the very government agency he spent 40 years trying to outsmart. Thomas Miller is currently inmate number 49201 at the correctional facility in Otisville. He is serving a 5-year sentence for fraud and elder abuse. The irony is poetic. He spent his life terrified of losing his status, and now he is just a number in a jumpsuit that does not fit. I do not visit him. I receive updates from his court-appointed lawyer who tells me Thomas spends his days writing letters to the appeals court claiming he was the victim of a conspiracy. He still does not understand. He still thinks he was robbed. He cannot grasp that he simply lost the game he started. Brittany fared no better. She is at a minimum security facility 2 hours south. The plea deal she tried to cut at the last minute fell through when the prosecutors realized she was just as complicit as her father. She lost her freedom, but the bigger blow was the loss of her audience. There are no Instagram filters in prison. There are no followers to validate her. Her social media accounts have been scrubbed, and the few friends she had evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked. She is alone in a way she never thought possible, stripped of the vanity that was her only currency. The estate is gone. The lake house where we spent our summers, the mansion where Thomas held court, the luxury cars in the driveway, everything was seized. The IRS does not play games. When the Dormant Trust Amendment triggered the liability transfer, the federal government moved with terrifying speed. They auctioned off the Miller family legacy to the highest bidder to satisfy the $2.5 million tax lien. Strangers now live in the house where I grew up. They sleep in my father's bedroom and park their sensible sedans where his Mercedes used to be. The physical erasure of his life is complete. And then there is Dante. I stopped by a fast food franchise on the edge of the city last Tuesday. I did not go in to eat. I parked across the street and watched. Dante Ricci, the man who used to wear $3,000 suits and brag about his real estate closing rates, was wiping down tables. He was wearing a polyester uniform with a name tag that looked ridiculous on his chest. He looked 10 years older. His hair was thinning and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of a man trying to make rent on a studio apartment. He lost his real estate license permanently. The ethics board does not look kindly on agents who drug their clients even if they turn state's witness. The divorce was finalized last month. Brittany refused to sign the papers, at first screaming from behind the plexiglass in the visiting room, but eventually she ran out of money to pay her lawyers. Dante got custody of his son, but it is a hard life. He traded a life of crime for a life of minimum wage and honesty. When he looked out the window and saw my car, he paused. He did not wave. He just nodded a small acknowledgement of the truce between us. He is miserable, but he is free. That was the deal. As for me, the suspension from my firm lasted exactly 3 days after the verdict. Mr. Henderson called me personally begging me to come back. It turns out that dismantling a complex multi-million-dollar family fraud scheme makes for an incredible resume booster. The story made the industry papers. Clients started calling the firm specifically asking for the auditor who took down her own father. They wanted that level of ruthlessness. They wanted the woman who could find the secrets buried in the deepest vaults. I walked back into the office, not as a junior associate on probation, but as the newest lead partner in the forensic division. My new office is on the 35th floor. It has glass walls and a view of the skyline that stretches all the way to the lake. I have a team of 4 auditors working under me now. We hunt corporate fraud, we trace hidden assets, and we expose the kind of greed that almost destroyed my grandmother. I sat at my mahogany desk this morning, signing off on a new engagement letter. The pay is triple what I was making before. The debts Liam and I had are gone, paid off with the first bonus check. We are building a new house, not a mansion, just a sturdy, comfortable home with a garden for Grandma. I looked at the nameplate on my door. Audrey Miller, partner. It felt heavy but good. The fear that used to define my career is gone. I used to worry about pleasing people, about being polite, about keeping the peace. Now I know that peace is not kept, it is made. Sometimes you have to burn the whole field down to let something healthy grow. I picked up my pen, the same one I used to sign the fake affidavit with my left hand. I twirled it in my fingers. My father tried to use my job to starve me into submission. Instead, he gave me the biggest promotion of my life. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. "Dinner is ready. Grandma is teaching me how to make her lasagna. Don't be late." I smiled and closed my laptop. The silence in my life is no longer empty. It is peaceful. The monsters are in cages, the debts are paid, and for the first time in my life, I am not looking over my shoulder. I am looking ahead. I grabbed my coat and walked out of the office, leaving the lights on behind me. The darkness was finally over. The lake was not the same one my father tried to steal. That water was tainted by generations of greed and secrets, but this water was clean. It was a smaller lake on the other side of the county, far away from the shadow of the Miller estate and the ghosts that haunted its hallways. The sun was beginning to set, casting a long golden ribbon across the surface of the water. It rippled gently against the wooden pylons of the dock, a rhythmic sound that used to make me anxious, but now just sounded like a heartbeat. A steady, calm heartbeat. I sat on the porch swing of our new home. It was not a mansion. It did not have marble floors or crystal chandeliers or a staff of servants walking on eggshells. It was a simple craftsman house with wide windows and a garden that Liam had planted himself. But to me, it was a fortress. It was a sanctuary built not with old money, but with the proceeds of hard work and the peace of mind that comes from having nothing to hide. Grandma Beatrice sat in the wicker chair next to me. She turned 83 last week, but she looked 10 years younger than she did on that horrible birthday party 6 months ago. Her color had returned. The sharpness in her eyes was back, that terrifyingly brilliant intellect that my father had tried so hard to drug into oblivion. She was holding a porcelain teacup, the steam rising in delicate swirls. For a long time, we just sat there, watching the dragonflies dart over the grass. There was no need to fill the silence. We had spent so many months screaming, fighting, and strategizing that the quiet felt like a luxury we were finally allowed to afford. Grandma lifted the cup to her lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. She closed her eyes, savoring the taste. It was Earl Grey with a splash of lemon. She had boiled the water herself. She had measured the leaves herself. There were no bitter powders hidden in the bottom. There was no fear in the ritual anymore. She set the cup down on the saucer with a soft clink. "This is good tea, Audrey," she said, her voice strong and clear. "It tastes like freedom." She turned to look at me, and then passed me to Liam, who was leaning against the railing. He was watching the horizon, his profile etched in the fading light. He looked tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes after a long day of honest work, not the exhaustion of looking over your shoulder. "You know," Beatrice said, leaning forward slightly, "I was angry with you that day at the party. When the police came and told you to leave, I wanted you to scream. I wanted you to tear the house down. I thought you were abandoning me to the wolves." I felt a pang of old guilt in my chest. "I know, Grandma. I hated leaving you there. I felt like a coward." Beatrice shook her head. "No, you were not a coward, you were smart." She looked at Liam. "You listened to your husband. He knew that if you fought them with anger, you would lose. You had to fight them with their own weapons. You had to be colder than they were. Smarter. If you had stayed, they would have arrested you, and I would be in a facility right now staring at a wall. But you ran. You ran so you could circle back and catch them." Liam reached out and took my hand. His palm was rough and warm. "We didn't win because we were stronger, Grandma," he said softly. "We won because we were right, and because Audrey knows how to read a spreadsheet better than Thomas knew how to hide one." I squeezed his hand. It was true. We had not used violence. We had not hired thugs or slashed tires like my father had. We had used the law. We had used the truth. We had used the meticulous, boring details of forensic accounting to dismantle a criminal empire. Justice was not a cinematic explosion. It was a stack of paper. It was a digital timestamp. It was a signature signed with the wrong hand. It was the quiet, persistent application of pressure until the cracks in their lies shattered the whole foundation. I looked out at the lake again. The water was turning a deep indigo as the evening set in. I thought about Thomas sitting in his cell, probably still trying to figure out who betrayed him. I thought about Brittany alone in the dark without her audience. I did not feel happy about their fate. I did not feel a surge of joy. I just felt a profound sense of balance. The scales had been tipped for so long, and now finally they were level. "We are safe here," Beatrice whispered, as if reading my mind. "They can never touch us again. The trust is dissolved. The money is gone, and what we have left is something they never understood. We have each other, and we have the truth." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool autumn air. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It smelled real. I looked at my grandmother, the matriarch who had outwitted a con artist from a nursing home bed. I looked at my husband, the man who had stood by me when the world called me crazy. And I realized that I was the richest person in the world. Not because of an inheritance, but because I had protected the people I loved. The war was over. The files were closed. The evidence was locked away. We sat there as the stars began to poke through the twilight one by one. There was nothing left to audit. There was nothing left to prove. There was just the tea, the lake, and the quiet victory of surviving the storm. What would you do if you discovered your loved ones were tearing each other apart for money? Would you turn a blind eye to keep the peace? Or would you burn the family tree to the ground to save the roots? Tell me your story in the comments below. The most profound lesson from the Miller family saga is that arrogance is the architect of its own destruction, while meticulous preparation is the ultimate weapon of justice. Thomas and Brittany operated under the fatal assumption that power, status, and aggression could rewrite reality. They believed that because they were loud and ruthless, they were untouchable. They treated their grandmother as an asset to be liquidated and their sister as a nuisance to be bought off. However, they forgot the golden rule of the modern age: everything leaves a trace. This story serves as a masterclass in forensic justice. It demonstrates that true strength does not require violence or intimidation. Audrey did not win by shouting louder than her father. She won by reading the fine print that he ignored. She won because she understood that a single signature, a time-stamped video, or a forgotten tax clause carries more weight in a courtroom than a lifetime of bullying. The boring details of law and finance, the tax liens, the trust amendments, the medical logs became the sword that cut through the lies. Ultimately, the narrative proves that greed is a brittle foundation. It pushes people to rush to cut corners and to sign documents without reading them. Integrity, on the other hand, is patient. It waits for the mistake. It documents the error. And when the trap finally snaps shut, it isn't luck. It is the inevitable result of character. The Millers lost everything not because they were outgunned, but because they valued money over loyalty, leaving them with neither. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member to do what was right, even when it cost you everything? Tell me your story in the comments below.